So we're with Luke Ryan at Black Rifle Coffee San Antonio, getting ready for his reading, and we're going to kill some time and talk about a couple things related to writing and the organizational process and stuff like that.
Sounds great.
Yeah, how are you, Luke?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for having me on, and glad to be really excited to just be launching this book and getting it out there and getting in people's hands and starting to hear about people reading it. It's super cool when you hear, it started to come in with like the pre-orders and the book club and people reading it. It's just super cool to like be interacting with people who have actually read this story that, started in the recesses of my brain. It's a cool experience. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's always every release that we've done, but particularly this one, when people are excited about it without having read anything more than a paragraph, that's humbling, as the author, and then for us as the publishers, to have people who have that much faith in like our previous releases to think, all right, this one's it too. So and it's definitely different though. So we'll talk a little bit about the storyline and stuff, but really want to talk about your organizational process.
Sure.
Because we did the PB Avate book club, and everybody kind of got a glimpse of like the War Office. Your workspace, which is super cool. Like you have a really cool system that allows you to work at the pace that you have set for yourself. Which I've always found, since we started talking, I've always found to be really inspiring. Like it's not for everyone. The system that you have in place, may not work for everybody, but like ideas are just that, So
yeah, and there are certain, people can take. It's exactly what I've done. Is people take certain, types of disciplines or techniques or little tools that they can apply in a mix-match way that best fits their own lives and their own schedules and their own, world. Because ultimately, it's about productivity, like actually getting writing across the finish line, getting it done, and then, and doing that in whatever life it is that you have already now, right? So like, I don't have very much time, I am like really, I have to really discipline myself to make sure that I'm getting in writing every day, and so I have these tools and these sort of structures to help me do that. Some other people I don't really need the clarity and headspace to like separate myself. Like I know a lot of creative people really need that, and I respect that for sure. I don't usually need that. It definitely helps from time to time, but yeah, having that, just having these tools to help out. So, I mean, for me, that's a very meticulous outlining process. That's a couple rules that help me discipline myself, because I really need that, and I need, especially as the weeks start rolling by and, you're 100 pages into something, it can get easy to lose that momentum and discipline. So I've got a couple tools that help me do that. I've sort of kept working on that system as I've been writing throughout the years, and it's helped me kind of refine that system in and of itself. And I see that not just the book itself, but also that my like system of writing is something that I'm always trying to make better as well.
At what point did you feel like you needed a system? Like, was there like a pivotal point where like you felt like you had to establish a system to be successful in like starting and finishing something?
Yeah, I mean, I was just tired of I had written a lot of stuff. But nothing. I was tired of just kind of writing here and there and not knowing what I was, not really having many finished products. And even if I would get really far into them, it wasn't so much I was like, oh, I need to develop a system. It was like, okay, I need to like get serious if I want to about this and start doing things that, that work for me, and I need to start doing them more. I mean, and then the system was born from me just identifying what those things were, and then really trying to capitalize on them and make it work.
Yeah. You talk a lot about getting the reps in. Like, what does that mean for you?
From a writing perspective, it is just writing every day, and writing in I like to write in different mediums and platforms. Really important. So my main master rule is that I always, talk about and stuff is to write 5 minutes every day. And that is going to always get the reps in, because that's daily writing that you have that, nobody can take away from you. And most anyone can discipline themselves to do anything for 5 minutes a day, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's, and more often than not, it cascades into 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And
it goes with anything.
Yeah, you could probably use that for whatever it is that you want to be working on, and if unless it requires you to like, that's at least in your sort of local sphere, that's within, your house or something. But
yeah, you can like world travel for
5 minutes a day.
Can't do it.
Yeah. But, I can write for 5 minutes a day. And the other part of that rule is it has to be on the project that I'm, like invested in. It has to be the project, whatever that means. So usually for me, that's a novel or a poetry book. And, I write a lot of articles for Coffee or Die magazine, and I write in a couple other places, and that doesn't count as that. That's a separate thing. So if I'm writing on those, I still have to go back and I have to work on my novel for 5 minutes a day. And another thing that does, besides just the obvious, like, it's surprising how 5 minutes every day, or, ultimately probably more like 15 to 20 is what it turns into. That adds up. But the other really important piece to that is that it keeps you in this creative mindset every day. So it's like you are always, and not just in general, but specifically to that book that you're writing. So your mind is always engaged in it. You're always locked into it. Yeah. And there is value, and sometimes if you're stuck for whatever reason, to step back and, switch that off for a second so you can come back fresh. But for the most part, it helps me so much to be able to be constantly engaged in this story. Invested. Yeah, day after day. And the like, if I have a problem, I'm like, okay, I need this character to be here doing this, because that is like, these two people are going to be fighting at the end and it's the big climax or something. Yeah. And, how does the antagonist get to that physical location? It doesn't really make sense that he would be there. This is a problem that I'm trying to like solve in my head. And, as I'm constantly engaged in this story, those answers, if I'm doing that, those answers will always just come up. They'll present themselves. So be like, oh, well, it would make sense that he would, come along here. And I've learned to actually trust that quite a bit, that if if it's a straight up flaw, then, you just fix it. But if it's a problem that you need an answer to creatively, when you're developing a narrative, like, developing a story, if you just wait and think about it and stay engaged, the answer like always comes.
Have you ever been one to like hop projects?
I've wanted to.
Yeah.
It will be like halfway through a book and I get this idea for a story and I'm like, this sounds really cool. I want to start writing this like right now. Yeah. I try not to though. I try to stay engaged. I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. I just know from my own personal experience, I've bounced around too many times, and there was a long period of time where I have all of these like 10 pages in, 20 pages in, all the way up to one piece that's 300 pages in, longer than this book, and it's not done, and it will never be, and I started something else at that point,
right.
And it was just kind of like,
and then you just have like piles of paper and weird little stacks like in your room, and
exactly. So, but for the most part, I like to really, if I am constantly engaged in this story, that's also where my mind is. So I'm not really thinking too much of other storylines when I'm having to write in this one every single day.
And writers talk about this all the time when they're like taking on a big project like that, the First Marauder takes place in Florida. Yeah. Like, what did you do to get yourself there, and like, have you had to do that with other pieces?
You mean get myself there in what sense?
I mean, in terms of like setting scenes and things like that.
Yeah.
Like, did you really have to like? Did you travel to get in the perspective? Did you?
So when I actually wrote the first draft
people?
of that, I was living in Tampa.
Yep.
So it was easy to be able to walk out of my back door and kind of get a feel for things, especially like these really small details of life that kind of dissipate from memory when you're gone from there for a little bit, but when you're there, you know, you can kind of capture that and write it, and it helps make this universe feel more real. I would say this particular book, The First Marauder, didn't take as much research because it was in Tampa and I was living there at the time. That's one reason. The other reason is because a lot of there's a lot of conflict and, you know, like human conflict, and it's at a level that I have experience with, you know, from both being exposed to violence as a kid, because I was in a school shooting when I was in 8th grade, not participating, hiding in there. And then I was also, you know, just my 4 deployments to Afghanistan, you know, as an adult, really like those, you know, that's the scope of conflict, you know, the level of conflict in this book is very much at that level. Tyler, the main character, the protagonist, is not very well trained or anything, so, but I know what that looks like a lot, you know, and I've seen that a lot, so, you know, how people like that interact in combat versus somebody who is really well trained.
And they develop as they, you know, go through it all.
Yeah, exactly. He grows with it, and, you know, just as I did, you know, as anybody who has to learn to fight has to, you know, learn that kind of stuff. So I would say that did not take a whole lot of research per se, but I also have a lot of experience in the jungle because I have done some aid work in Burma. So the climate is similar. The problems that you have are similar to, you know, what it would be to traipse around in the jungles of Florida, essentially. So, you know, with obvious exceptions like entire, you know, ghost towns and stuff like that, which they don't really have in Burma. It's just jungle, like where I was at anyway. So, you know, I'd say those experiences, and that's one of the reasons why I made this story set the way that it's set, is because I knew that it being my first sort of like, you know, this first novel that I'm putting together, I wanted to really draw from those. And now that I finished a sequel, and the 3rd book is what I'm starting now, and, you know, won't give anything away, but it has required a lot more research, and I'm in that phase now for the 3rd book. So I am, you know, it has a lot to do with amphibious warfare, which, you know, I know enough about. Like, you know, I've like hopped in Zodiacs in Ranger School, and like, you know, gone to the you know, like the kind of culminating event in Ranger School, and done a few like very meager training exercises, but, you know, I don't have that kind of experience with, and it's at kind of the command level too, a lot of what I'm writing, which I obviously have no experience with, you know, because I was an enlisted dude, and also fighting in Afghanistan, not really, well, one, not a lot of water, and then 2, you know, it's not really a total war situation. So, you know, I'm doing a lot of research on, you know, I've had a couple really gracious people kind of point me in the right direction for, you know, books to read and just sort of rabbit holes to dive down.
It's like the responsible thing to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, because you want to, number one, you don't want to come off like an asshole, and you know, because you have Jericho's been saying, I don't know if somebody, you know, smart said it or if it's him being smart and saying it, but he's been saying having experiences is not the same thing as being experienced.
Yeah.
Right. Those are different things. Mm-hmm. In an age where, you know, everyone is an instructor and everyone is a consultant and an expert on whatever they're an expert on. Yeah. You know, it is ethical and responsible, like in storytelling, to want to be able to tell, like, knowledgeable enough to tell like the story to the best of your ability.
Yeah, and it opens up all sorts of doors. I mean, you have like the beating heart of your story, whatever that is, you know, and when you have these real life details, like, and you immerse yourself in this research and in this world, you have, it just opens up all of these sort of like little things that you would never really think of initially, but they speak to the story. An example from the first book. So, you know, my research for the first book, because of the way I wrote it, was just my own experiences. So I've just been doing the research for it for my whole life. And, you know, there's an excerpt that I read in the at the book club last night, which was about just them trying to invent a system of metals, you know, for their like militia for this post-apocalyptic town that's inventing their own kind of militia military group. And, you know, the kind of leader, mayor, politician character, he wants to invent metals. And, you know, it's kind of, they're not sure whether or not it's he, you know, some people might try to use it as an honest to God reward for great actions done in combat, or, you know, wounds sustained in combat or something. And then, you know, this politicians might be trying to leverage it for other type of reasons, selfish reasons. And, you know, I think that just knowing a little bit about the politics surrounding certain, you know, metals and how people treat them and all this stuff, it's a really short scene, and they just talk about it briefly. But I felt like it really adds to this depth and universe, and also to the questions that Tyler's starting to ask, which is like, why am I doing what I'm doing? You know, am I doing it for like the reward and praise of these people? You know, like, does this kind of thing matter to me? Which is an important question to ask. And yeah, and you know, because the answer is probably, in real life, the answer is complicated. You know, and so just stuff like that is pretty. It's pretty cool once you have that. If you can root it in as much reality as possible. I mean, the setting is totally fiction. It's a post-apocalyptic world. You know, it's like, you know, the characters are all made up and everything's made up. But the more like reality you can root it in, even if you're going a less ultra realism route, you know, and you're going more a fantastical route, like, you can still, I don't know, it can insert so many opportunities to insert cool like things that you would never think of otherwise.
Did you, I mean, back to Tampa too, like, was there a single moment or like a series of moments that made you think like, yeah, it's going to be set like in the jungle, in the swamps, like that's where I want it, and this is it? Because like, I feel like a lot of the post-apocalyptic books that people, you know, that usually come to mind for people are in like the Midwest, but mostly I think in the desert.
Yeah.
And I think there's symbolism in that too, but like, but the desert seems to be like the most common thing, whether it's a movie or a book. So I thought it was really cool that like you switched it up.
Yeah.
Was that the motivation, just to do it different, or?
There was. I mean, the obvious benefit of me living there at the time was great. It's a really interesting. So a lot of the times the desert, ruinous sort of, you know, all these ruins and like old buildings that are totally blown out, that kind of contributes to this post-apocalyptic vibe, because it communicates that everything's dead and there's a few survivors. I thought it was an interesting image to have, like nature essentially just reclaiming everything, and that is going to happen in a place like Florida for sure. So this image of, you know, like vines and you know, overgrowth and all, like, you know, grass just growing super high and like weeds everywhere, you know, and all this stuff, like there's a lot of like descriptions of, you know, different like weeds popping up through the cracks in the pavement, and, you know, certain vines, like there was forgetting the name of it, but like different invasive species of vines, like just sort of like overrunning all of these different, I don't remember.
Kudzu's that shit that eats like cars and...
There's one actually that, like, from an imagery standpoint, I thought would have been the perfect image, except it's called something really stupid like air potato or something. I think that's what it's called.
That's not going to work.
And I was like, I can't use that. Just like when you're reading it, it just totally takes you out of it, because I was like, that sounds... so.
And that's the moment that you almost made it a fantasy, so you could make up your own plant with like a badass name.
Air potato. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. But yeah, so I really like that image of that, you know, overgrowth and nature kind of reclaiming things. There's another image that I have of Tyler goes up to the second story of a building after a firefight, and he like looks out a window, and there's like it's like a kid's room. There's like a teddy bear, and it's like half decayed by mold, and there's like all this overgrowth under it, and you know, it's all kind of like taken over, just like the rest of the house and the rest of the world. And he kind of, you know, he clears the window so he can, like, you know, use his get a clear line of sight for shooting out of that window. And kind of like human beings are kind of like always wiping away that overgrowth wherever they can, to try to reestablish their presence in a space, which is just I don't think anybody would pick that up reading it overtly, like consciously, but with a lot of those images, when you insert a lot of that stuff subconsciously, it feels that way. You feel that that interaction between nature and people, and the few survivors trying to clamber back into the civilization as much as they can.
Super cool, man. Were there any parts of Tampa that inspired particular parts of the book?
More practical.
Did you travel at all?
Yeah, it was more practical. It's one of the reasons why a lot's in the jungle too, is because at a certain point, especially with a lot of chaotic conflict going on, you would just go out to the jungle. Like you wouldn't mess around with, you're not going to be like trying to set up on, the 15th story of a blown out skyscraper, because, it's just one, it's a giant target, and two, it's the sort of, I would not trust buildings as they started to get old and overgrown, and like big buildings like that, with especially in Tampa with storms coming through, monsoons, and that's another piece to it. Is the weather and the storms that come through there is a huge part of the first book in particular, and just like the hurricanes that come through there, they just rip stuff up every year with no infrastructure to defend against them, and then the practical piece of like tactically being, a lot of people would just go out into the woods and try to build a cabin out there or something and live sustainably in some way. And certainly troop movements would not be down highways or anything like that. They'd be taking paths and smaller roads and stuff like that, foot trails, or just straight through the jungle, depending on how well they know the area and what they know, how well they know what they're doing, all stuff like that.
Man, so cool. Did you find? I mean, we were talking earlier about you immersing yourself in a story and like fully investing in it. Did you find that you were constantly viewing the world from that, like while you were writing it? Like I remember coming back from Iraq when we were clearing overpasses and stuff, coming home like from the airport on like mid-tour leave, like I was doing that, right? Like a lot of people, and I think that's pretty common, but like did you find like in the storytelling like that you were, in thinking like, oh, like what would Tyler do next? Like you were looking at like peers like that and like, like different like small scale conflicts. Like did you feel like, oh man, like this could spiral out of control in like a post-apocalyptic world? Yeah, you kind of start to see things through the lens of, your writing, right? Like your everyday situations that, maybe not situations, but especially like settings, seeing buildings, because I'm a big fan of specificity and like, unique things and unique images, right? And add so much to the story. And in my mind, if I want to come up with a post-apocalyptic story, I'm thinking of like, like the skyscraper, the bank, the house, but it's like, well, what does, the gas station, right? But what does like there are a ton of like interesting buildings and settings that you can have that you just wouldn't necessarily think of, like a school, what does that look like? And then when you're going through that, when you're clearing through, like say there's a fight in and around a school in this book, and a long abandoned, school, and what does it look like to be navigating those hallways and stuff like that? And I had just visited a school kind of around that time, and kind of gave me that idea. I mean, some of it would be a nightmare because a lot of the schools nowadays, they're like super closed off, no windows, no nothing, just hallways, really confusing, kind of a labyrinth of sorts. And what goes hand in hand with the accuracy too, right? Like we were talking about before, like I know on the social media we've definitely had people comment and say like, oh, like I grew up in Tampa, so it's cool to see this set here. Mm-hmm. So like immediately, like what I thought, I was like, oh well, like good thing Luke knows his shit, and he like wrote the scenes really well, because with people buying the book maybe specifically for that, like you don't want to disappoint. Yeah, I mean, you as you read it, you can throw open Google Maps, and every location reference is a real location. Every if I don't want to get too specific about like an actual business name, I'll just say like this, like
Catholic church in this town, or like a school in this town, and yeah, just and then getting back to like the specificity of it too. I mean, yeah, real places, but what the real power is that when you can connect that to the heart of the story. The main reason why it's a school is because this dude is like learning like all this stuff at once. He's drinking from the fire hose, and he's in this school of combat, and he's literally in combat and literally in a school. And that all on top of the fact that I know what it's like to be in a school and people are like shooting. So that's like a memory that I can draw from and add to that sort of authentic kind of experience. So just, and that's really what it's about, like all the setting stuff and all the character stuff, all these sort of real facets of the story. They got to connect to the beating heart of your story, which, you can call it, I like to just call it theme, A lot of people think that means that it has to be a really heavy-handed, like the moral of the story is this. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. Like a lot of great books and films have a really clear, like All Quiet on the Western Front. We were talking about that earlier. That's a super obvious theme, is that like war is this hellish experience that has broken these people down. That's a very clear theme. And
you also might get no themes. You might sometimes some people read books and like they do not pull themes from it. They just read it.
No, well,
it is like the passive act of consuming a story, and that's it. Like
exactly.
they don't mull it over. There's nothing to it, and that's fine too.
Yeah, that is fine. And there's a certain like escapism and entertainment value too, that kind of like, and those are two kind of separate things, but they go hand in hand, and like that comes with that. I think really what theme is though is it's the connection to the human experience, right? Yes. And that's really the important part. It's this, what resonates with people, what really hits home with people, right? And so if you can connect all of these elements that we're talking about to that human experience, theme or whatever you want to call it, that's really gonna like ring true, and it's gonna add a lot to, your whole story overall. And whether people are looking for it or not, I think it'll still hit home. People still cry during sad movies, even if they're not out to, have an emotional experience. I mean,
but I think there's definitely a difference between that and just like interest, right? Like the human experience and interest. Like, how many Nicholas Sparks novels have you read?
Zero.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, same. It doesn't.
Seen a couple movies though.
Me. Yeah, for sure. But don't tell anybody.
Yeah, right.
And we can watch one together sometime.
Yeah, that'll be a real cute time. Yeah.
But I mean, like, it doesn't interest us. We can't relate to it, right? But it's also, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't relate to it. It just means that we're not willing to because of like the shared interest.
I will say that, I actually started talking about this at the book club, and there's a reason why I'm a writer and not a talker, is because sometimes I go off on tangents and forget what I was saying initially. But I started saying I started talking about it. In this book, there's a piece that is from a conversation that I actually heard in real life, which was this guy was talking about why he loves metal and just music that is, and not specifically like all metal, but metal that's super like at its heart. He the way he described it is like kind of angry, right, like mad. And so and he said that like a lot of teenagers relate to it, and this is why a lot of people scoff at teenagers for liking these rebellious types of music, that people are angry. It's because when they get to a certain age, they feel that like they have this, they start to realize that the world isn't as clear of a picture as they were painted, and they feel a little bit shortchanged. They feel like, maybe not shortchanged, but they feel unsettled with the way that things really are as they're learning the way that things really are. Yeah. And that's why that's why they relate to this angsty music, is because they're like, man, so many people have this face on, so many like parents and so many people in general have this face on that like, especially around kids, that everything's fine all the time. And, then they hear this music that's like measures up to what they're starting to discover, which is that everything's not fine. And, ever since I heard him say that ever since I heard that conversation, because I don't really like metal that much, as soon as I heard that, I started to be like, okay, you know what? Like this makes me interested in a lot more stories, and like I'm a huge movie person, so like I will actually at this point can enjoy pretty much any movie, because even if it's like a quote unquote bad movie, I mean there's movies that you love to hate and all that stuff, but I mean I can really like start to pull out like, you know, there's some seed almost in every film that's like, and book too, there's some seed, there's some heart to it, even if it's not well communicated or it's not, you know, it's really just an action movie. You know, it's still there, and it's like, you know, how can I find that? It's why I don't write book or movie reviews. When I write an article, because I write a lot about, you know, movies and books, for Coffee or Die magazine right now, that's what I write about. Whatever I find. It doesn't matter, even if it's like, you know, not good,
just a critique,
whatever.
but like an actual investigation into everything around it.
Yeah, nobody really cares what I think about this movie or that movie, but if I'm like, this part really spoke to me and this is really interesting, now we're talking about the movie as a vehicle, or the book as a vehicle for this idea. And that, a lot of people is interesting, because that human experience seed, that thing, is that theme or whatever, is, I mean, by definition, it's going to be something that everybody can relate to, because everybody is a human being, and that's, you know, I mean, the most basic action movie is going to have some element about physical courage in it somewhere. You know, that's something that's why we make so many in America, is because that's a value that we hold very highly in America, is physical courage in dangerous situations, you know. Whether we like it or not, those people keep going back to watch those. They keep spending money that they made to watch more of them. And, you know, I think most people don't articulate that, or like, that's not like the reason that they just go because it's like a rad movie and there's explosions and stuff. But at a basic level, I think that is an element in like action movies that people relate to. And so what's that seed? What's that, you know, theme? What's the beating heart of this piece? And yeah.
Well, that leads me to another question. Who do you think is the reader of the First Marauder? Like, who do you think is, like, if you had to describe the audience, you know, the average audience?
Yeah. I think that really I would think about two. So the first thing that I do when I'm thinking about stuff like that is,
it's a hard question.
Yeah, actually I have three answers for it.
Yeah.
One is
I wouldn't
me.
expect no less.
One is me. I write stuff for myself because I know that I'm not special, and I know that way more people are like me than I think they are. And if I write something true and honest to myself, the more true and honest it is to myself, the more you'd be surprised how many people will actually like it. You know, if you're trying to cater to other people, you can get into like, you know, tropes and stereotypes and like just things that are kind of like inauthentic. But if you're really writing, you know, you're like, I want to write the one thing that I want to read. I think it was Jordan Peele. I think I heard him say something once that was like, you know, when he was talking about making Get Out, he was like, I wanted a movie that I wanted to go see. Like, I made a movie that I wanted to go watch. Yeah. And that, you know, like that's sort of the first answer to that, I think. Also, like, just the veteran crowd who's like kind of into reading, or, you know, like is trying to, you know, pick up something that can be a little bit entertaining, because I mean there's a lot of action in it, there's a lot of like, you know, there's a lot of, it's rooted in reality, it's tactical, it's, you know, it can be a little bit gruesome, but it's an adventure, it's a dark adventure, but it's an adventure that this kid's going on. So
it's
I think
also like a more realistic, like literary version of, like, you know, like that dumb shit that you always see on Facebook, like, you know, tag your apocalypse team.
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah. I mean, read, you know, 250 pages of it, and then let me know what you think. Yeah, well, yeah, and there's a lot of elements in there that, like, you know, a lot of people who would think that they're ready for something, you know, would be surprised that of what is, in my opinion, really needed in a situation like that, which is less about, you know, stockpiling and more about, you know, training and mindset of flexibility and all this stuff. Training being the biggest one. You know, being in shape being a huge one. I mean, and that's you know, everywhere in the book is like, you know, he feels like he's at
the limits of his strength a lot, and the people who are more capable than him are not at the limits of their strength yet, or at least a lot of scenes. So I think a lot of veterans, they can resonate with the combat part. They can resonate with learning how to be. I mean, the kids joining this fictitious new military, and there's a lot of elements. Some of them fun, some of them like not so much, about doing that. Getting yelled at for stupid stuff that you do, and how you feel when you get yelled at, and kind of tearing yourself apart when you're, a new private, and you just make some dumb mistake, especially in combat, that could potentially have, something could have gone really wrong. So I think there's a lot of elements that a lot of military people could relate to. And then thirdly, again, just a general audience, going back to the first one, if I wrote it for myself, and I think that those base elements of, really at the heart of this book is endurance, really the value of living, the understanding of living in a practical world is a big one, As a writer, I get up in my own head a lot, but, when you're in like combat, especially, it's the most severe. Like, you are living in the space that you're in, and, you might, every little detail there is very apparent to you and super clear. So there's a lot of themes like that, and kind of things going on under the surface that everybody can relate to, I think, and everybody knows a little bit about, hey, like at the end of the day, I have to do a practical thing, like pay my bills. I have to work, and I have to do things that I don't want to do. Everybody understands the value and importance of endurance, right? Like, to some degree, I had to do this in order to survive, whether that's in like literally survive, or like financially survive, or like for people's families or whatever, that's so. And I try to. That's three. Me, veteran audience, veteran/military, and then everybody. Because if I'm hitting my themes right, then that's everybody.
I think you're right. I think you're on the money with the third.
I hope so. We'll see.
When you look at things like this, when you look at books like this, then like some of these are going to cater to everyone. I think everyone, if you read The Road, I think everybody could get something out of that.
For sure.
Even people who don't like Cormac McCarthy could probably get something out of The Road. There's a whole bunch. There was it was a 2-book series about the after effect of like an EMP. Cool. I can't remember what it was, but I mean, that's realistic, then what would happen? And this is the same kind of thing, what would happen? But it's not just like all of a sudden everyone has what they need. This kind of shows the build up to it, and how things get established afterward.
It's interesting, this post-apocalyptic genre does what the war genre does, in the sense that it takes certain ideas like fear, courage, like desperation, is a big one, and again, things that everybody experiences. But the battlefield really distills those elements down to their most pure, basic forms, right? Like courage and fear being two obvious ones. And the post-apocalyptic setting, it's interesting, does that in a setting that we're all familiar with, right? Usually in America, or where in this case Tampa, the Tampa area, and but it makes that place essentially a war zone all the time for not in and out of firefights. So it's really it functions in the same way that a war novel does, but it does it in this a little bit more fantasy kind of environment. But it's cool, and I think that's one reason why it's so popular right now, is that genre is because it allows you to do that, to distill those ideas to so basic. It's the desperation piece is definitely in my book. That's a really popular theme though in a lot of like movies and books now, and so that's an interesting sort of recurring theme that you see in that setting a lot.
For sure. Man, anything else you want to say about the book? Anything you feel like you didn't say in the book that you want to make it clear?
No, man, I'm just really excited to get this one out. I'm excited for people to get invested in this story, and it doesn't end with the first one, you know. There's second and third, and I'm really excited to push these out and for people to get their hands on them and to let me know what they think about them. And yeah, I love talking to people that have read it. I mean, that book club was such a cool experience because it's like, you know, let's talk about this thing that I just read that I made. And it's a humbling, cool experience. I mean, it takes a while to read a book, so they, you know, made it all the way to the end of mine, and that's pretty rad.
Yeah, Michael and Schumann have done just a killer job with that PB Abate book club.
Yeah, seems super
it's
cool.
definitely one of the coolest parts that they've done. Like, it's, you know, even doing it remotely, being able to do that on such a regular basis and just crush books with dudes that may not have otherwise been reading. So, and the discussions afterward are really cool too. And luckily, they've, you know, secured books, you know, small and large, that they've been able to lock down talks with the author like you.
Yeah, that's
so super cool. Yeah, the book's shipping now, so you know we're gonna keep getting feedback and stuff. But the results thus far have been solid. Everybody's feeling it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, man.